Welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight during this time of reform and transition. And welcome to our webinar on military's pollution, spending, legislation, presented by Sierra Club New York City Group Sustainability Series. My name is Catherine Skopik, and I am chair of this group and of its sustainability series and delegate to the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. Peace, not war. Peace allows us to take care of ourselves, each other, and our environment. Peace allows us to expand our awareness, knowledge, arts, and science. Peace allows us to protect our planet, heal, and restore what has been broken, and to give nature the time and space it needs to revive. And although the military is making positive contributions, like some of the best battery storage research and development, and working on the military outings program to give people who often wouldn't get the opportunity to be out in nature to be so, and we're working actually with Sierra Club on this program. However, still, the military is basically a war machine that is causing air, water, land pollution, using up vast amounts of finite resources, destroying life in its wake, and preventing the peace for which the human voice calls out. While pollution increases, including radiation, and the Pentagon budget remains obscene compared to humanitarian work needing to be accomplished, there are those working to change this. Here to let us know about some of the facts and good work being done are three speakers who will touch upon all these topics, and primarily Tamara Lorenz will be talking about military pollution, Tom Gogan about military spending, and Sally Jones about the legislation that we need to change some of this. After each speaker, we will have a few questions. And then after all speakers have gone, time permitting, we'll have more Q&A from the audience. We are grateful you chose to be with us this evening. We will close with a few actions you can take. Thank you again for being with us this evening. May you learn and be uplifted by our presentation. Tamara? And Tamara is with us from Canada. Tamara Lorenz and her family live southwest of Toronto, and she has lived in several different places in Canada. Tamara is a PhD candidate in global governance at the Balsillie School for International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University. She has a master's in international politics and security studies from the University of Bradford, and a law degree and MBA specializing in environmental law and management from the Dalhousie University. Her research is on the climate and environmental impacts of the military, perfect for this evening's presentation. She is a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Tamara is also on the advisory committee of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space and the No to NATO Network. And here from International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier College at the Balsillie School is Tamara Lorenz. Tamara?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present. I'm going to share my screen. So I'll just get that up. Share screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the last time that I was in New York City was in September of 2014. I was attending the huge historic climate march there. And there you can see me standing in front of the Veterans for Peace huge float that they had, and it says on the float, U.S. military, largest consumer of oil, largest emitter of CO2. And if you look at the small sign that I'm holding there, it says demilitarization for deep decarbonization, stop the wars, stop the warming. This is a title of a report that I did for the International Peace Bureau in September of that year. And I presented it on a panel with Michael Clare. And it was at that time that I had the pleasure of meeting Sally. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the military's carbon emissions and contamination. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the science. So where I am right now in Waterloo, Ontario, there's a heat advisory in my city. With the heat and the humidity, the temperature today is 39 degrees Celsius, which is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. On your slide, you can see that this is a headline from The Guardian newspaper, and it says potentially fatal bouts of heat and humidity are on the rise. And it's an article based on a study that the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory at Columbia University did. Scientists monitored about 7,000 sites around the world, and they found that there are increasing extreme heat and humidity events that are potentially fatal to humanity. So the heat waves that we're seeing, the devastating forest fires and the droughts. Our house is on fire, as Greta Thunberg, that young Swedish activist said. In September of 2019, a number of international scientific organizations came together and produced this excellent report called United in Science. And it's a 25-page report. It's very simple and accessible. It's an excellent overview about the state of the climate crisis. I encourage everybody to look at it and to distribute it. And in that report, it said, meeting the Paris Agreement target requires immediate and all-inclusive action encompassing deep decarbonization. 2 months later, the United Nations Environment Program released their emissions gap report, and they said that the United States and Canada are not on track to meet the Paris Agreement. They also said that there is a global carbon budget remaining of about 380 gigatons. That's the amount of carbon that we can emit into the atmosphere and still remain within this Paris Agreement target, which is a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius increase to the global mean temperature. So with this carbon budget, we have about 8 to 10 years to rapidly decarbonize. Now, the Paris Agreement also has some really important ethical principles for how countries need to engage in their policymaking. So these principles are transparency, accountability, equity, justice, just transition, and sustainable development. I want you to think about these principles as I move forward in my presentation. So not only are we facing a climate crisis, we're also facing an ecological crisis. We have worsening air pollution, deforestation, and our oceans are in peril. Over the past 70 years, there has been a dramatic increase into dead zones. There are now 500 dead zones around the world. This is a map from a report done by the academic journal Science, and you can see the red dots there are all of the dead zones around the world, and so many are clustered around the United States and Europe. So let's talk about how the military fits into the climate crisis. Last June, the Cost of War Project at Brown University released this excellent report on Pentagon fuel use and the military's carbon emissions. This is a report that was done by Dr. Netta Crawford, and it's considered the first time that the fuel consumption and carbon emissions of the US military have been tracked in this way. So what she found in her report was that the US military releases more carbon in the atmosphere every year than the emissions from Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. So these are middle-sized countries, developed countries. Let's look at the carbon footprint a little bit more deeply from this report. So you can see Sweden has annual emissions of about 50 million metric tons. Its population is 10 million people. So its per capita emissions are very low at 5 metric tons. Canada, you can see there, 617 million metric tons. We have a population of 36 million, 17 metric tons per person. The United States has 5 gigatons, 5 billion metric tons of CO2 every year, a population of approximately 324 million people, and so it's about 16 metric tons per person. But if you were to focus on the US military, from this report, it's 59 metric tons per year, but the size of the US military is approximately 2 million people, so that gives it a huge carbon blueprint of about 28 metric tons. And all Western militaries have about the size. So the US military creates a ton of carbon pollution. From this report, there is also this excellent chart. And what she did is she has military aircraft, and you can see where the arrow is. It shows the F-35 fighter jet. It has an internal fuel consumption of 18,000 pounds, and with that amount of fuel, it has a range of about 1,000 nautical miles. So in one long-range flight of an F-35, it releases 27.8 metric tons in that flight. That is more than the CO2 of a standard vehicle in the entire year, and this is just one flight. This is from Forbes magazine, and it shows the cost of operating different US fighter jets. And the green arrow there shows the F-35 with an hourly operating cost of about $28,000. So just in 2 hours of flying an F-35, I mean, this is the salary practically of a nurse or a teacher in the United States. I mean, this is extremely costly. Now, I bring this to your attention because the F-35 program is the most expensive weapons program in human history. Lockheed Martin, the largest weapons manufacturer, is going to be producing 3,100 of these F-35 fighter jets. The US military is going to have 2,000 of them, and then other countries around the world, close US allies, are going to be buying the remaining 1,000 fighter jets. This is an article from the New York Times last August, and she details all of the problems with this fighter jet, the noise, the technical problems, the fuel use. It is this kind of weapon system that is going to prevent the United States and humanity from meeting the Paris Agreement target. It's this kind of militarism that's going to cause problems for us. So just some general information about the climate impacts of the military. As you know from this report, the US military is the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuel, spending between $8 and $17 billion a year. It is also the largest landholder in the world, with about 800 military bases in 70 countries. It has an energy strategy, and it's called Energy for the Warfighter. Of the different branches of the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, it's the Air Force that uses the most fuel, and they use a specialized fuel called JP-8 for their fighter jets, which is more highly refined and toxic, so that these fighter jets can fly at higher altitudes and at faster speeds than commercial aircraft. Of the total petroleum products that the military uses. 75% of it is for powering its vehicles, it's for its operations, and 25% is for stationary operations. Now, military vehicles like fighter jets and warships and light armored vehicles, they are highly energy inefficient, they have long life cycles, and they have locked in energy platforms that are very difficult to modify. Now, accounting for military emissions is not transparent in the greenhouse gas inventories. There are clauses for exemptions and confidentiality that allows governments, not just the US government, but governments around the world, to not fully and transparently report their military emissions. And military emissions are exempted from the national reduction targets. And I'll show you that in a minute. And in my opinion, NATO, which is dominated and dictated by the United States, is one of the greatest threats to the climate. This is from the latest inventory of US greenhouse gases, emissions and sinks. You can see from 2017, and it says very clearly there that emissions from military activities are not included in the transportation totals. They are exempted from the national reduction policies as well. This is an article that I wrote last December. NATO is a threat to the climate. I just want you to think for a minute that in December, NATO had its big 70th anniversary in London at the exact same time that the big conference of the parties on climate change was being held in Madrid. But the Canadian Prime Minister and President Trump was there in London talking about NATO instead of dealing with the climate crisis. Now, I just very briefly want to talk about military contamination. The US military is one of the largest consumers and producers of hazardous consumers of hazardous material and producers of hazardous waste in the country. There are thousands of former and current military bases that are contaminated across the country. This contamination arises from the use of propellants and solvents and from munitions debris and unexploded ordinances. There's also a history of environmental racism and expropriation of land for military bases, both in Canada and the United States. And the remediation of these contaminated military sites is very costly, it's very slow, and it's always incomplete. I'll just read very quickly this quote from the Mint Press News from 3 years ago. They write, producing more hazardous waste than the 5 largest US chemical companies combined, the US Department of Defense has left a toxic legacy throughout the world in the form of uranium, oil, jet fuel, pesticides, and defoliants like Agent Orange and lead, among other pollutants. This is an excellent study that was done by ProPublica 3 years ago. It's called Bombs in Your Backyard. You can put your postal code or address into the search engine, and you can find out how close you live to a contaminated military site in the US. This is an excellent study that was done by the Environmental Working Group looking at water contamination from military sites across the US. This is contamination from PFASs. These are a group of man-made chemicals that are highly toxic, that they persist a long time in the environment. They also bioaccumulate, they pollute and groundwater, and they have terrible health impacts such as reproductive problems and cancer as well. So I encourage you to have a look at this map. All of this, the military's carbon emissions and the contamination contribute to climate and environmental injustice. Military missions and expenditures are highly immoral and unethical. And if you consider the Paris Agreement ethical principles, they violate all of them. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how is it possible for us to have a just transition or sustainable development when our countries, Canada and the United States, use a disproportionate amount of fuel to power their militaries and for war fighting? How is it possible for us to have equity when our militaries have a greater share of the carbon budget for their fighter jets, warships, and tanks? I am convinced that we need to have a parallel process of disarmament and demilitarization alongside climate mitigation and adaptation. And then for a Green New Deal, a Red Deal for our Indigenous people, and a just recovery, we need to have these three pillars: demilitarization, decarbonization, and decolonization. We need to have the courage to talk about demilitarization. This is, I'm just a couple more slides and I'm wrapping up. This is the group that I'm involved in, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. We have a campaign, demilitarize, decarbonize. When I was at that historic march in New York City, I was very heartened to see these signs: windmills, not weapons. We need to have conversion plans. The Campaign Against the Arms Trade in the UK has this fantastic report called Arms to Renewables. There's this other report called Warheads to Windmills that was done in the United States, and I encourage you to have a look at them. These are examples of solutions that we need. My friends in Maine have this conversion campaign. This is a fantastic banner that they have. They march all across the state with these banners. And then finally, another example for us is the country of Costa Rica that has abolished its military 70 years ago. Last year, they announced that they're going to be the first country to be both carbon-free and plastic-free. And there's a fantastic film that I encourage you to watch called A Bold Peace: Costa Rica's Path to Demilitarization, to show you how this can be possible. And then also to say that Costa Rica is the country in Latin America that's been able to handle the COVID crisis the best. They have the least amount of cases, and that's because they haven't invested in soldiers. They're investing in healthcare and education. It's also a country that has free healthcare for all of their citizens. I want to invite you all to come to Canada next June. We're having this huge conference, Divest, Disarm, and Demilitarize. You can find out more information about the world on the World Beyond War website. These are some resources that I will send to Catherine so that you can have them on the website. You can share them. And then to transition to Tom, because Tom is going to be talking about military spending, I just want to show you a couple of slides that I've prepared on US military spending. So as you all know, last March when President Trump announced his huge budget, a huge increase for the military, but he set a cut of 5% to the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, most people know how much money that the US military gets, over $700 billion, but a lot of people don't know how much the EPA's budget is. So this is a chart that I created from the Office of Management and Budget, and you can see for 2018, the Department of Defense budget was $656 billion, but the Environmental Protection Agency's budget is only $8 billion. Now, Trump is going to cut this by 30%. The other thing that I did is I tracked spending on the Department of Defense versus the Environmental Protection Agency over the past 20 years. And you can see that it's gone from $258 billion in 1997, and now the military budget is over $650 billion. But you can see that over the past 20 years, the EPA's budget has flatlined between $6 and $8 billion. This is just not enough money to deal with the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. And then many people know that the US military budget is so high, but many people don't know that it is one of the agencies that hasn't been audited. So every 2 years, the US Government Accountability Office releases their high risk list, and the DoD is always at the top of this list. And finally, just to bring to your attention, the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington has done an excellent report comparing spending on the military versus spending on the climate. And you can see this is a chart from their their report, it's just so disproportionate. So we really need to turn this around, folks. We need to move the money, and I'm really looking forward to what Tom says about this problem of military expenditures, and then hearing from Sally about what we can do about it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. Thank you so very much, Tamara. I have so many questions for you. And we thank Sally for bringing Tamara to us as her friend. I did want to say that we will be hopefully getting this whole webinar up on the Sierra Club New York City Group website. And so if people want to go back to it, look at it, pause, look at all those facts and figures that you gave, it's absolutely obscene to see those differences in the military budget and the EPA. But thank you very, very much, Tamara. That was absolutely excellent. Now, I think we might be able to take 1 or 2 questions now, and then we're going to have Tom speak, and then we'll have more questions at the end. Okay, the first question I answered, can we get copies of these slides? Okay, so everybody wants, me too, please. They were excellent, so excellent. Okay, perfect. And anybody in the chat box, if you want to have a copy of the chat box, at the bottom to the right, there's a little rounded box with 3 little dots. Click on that box and you can save the chat. Okay, and now we're going to have Tom. And okay, so I will introduce Tom. And Tom Gogan is the interim chair of the United States Labor Against the War New York City chapter and a member of National Writers Union. And he is active in Veterans for Peace, Chapter 34, New York City, and a leader in Move the Money, New York City. Tom, floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, and it's great to be with everybody tonight. And I really want to thank Sierra Club New York City Group for this invitation and for putting this together, because we just have to get out of our silos and build a better, stronger, wiser movement. So I'll jump right into my comments, and my version is low tech, but I sure appreciate what Tamara put up. Great slides. So we live in momentous times. As Naomi Klein says, it will take everyone to change everything. And it looks like young people have taken that message to heart. Young people are taking the future into their own hands, massively. It was just last September that Greta Thunberg sailed to our shores and was met by vast numbers right here in New York City. Hundreds of thousands turned out to meet her before she addressed the UN on climate change. And I would say well over half that crowd were under 30. In the past 2 weeks, after the brutal murder of George Floyd and so many others, the outpouring of grief and anger has combined with a huge, sustained, and righteous call for change by young people of color in the lead and many whites as allies. We want big change, structural change, radical change, change that would put a stop to brutal policing. City councils and state legislatures are finally beginning to respond, including right here in New York. For example, just yesterday, the New York State Legislature outlawed chokeholds, and I understand has also agreed to take away the veil of police disciplinary proceedings. It'll be available for the public to see. So we need to divest policing from its racist old roots in slave catching. We need to restructure policing, or public, maybe better stated, public safety, to make it truly accountable to our communities and not mainly to the big financial and corporate lobbies that usually run things in this country. The demand to defund the police has echoes in the movement to defund the sources of climate change by divesting from the fossil fuel corporations and the giant hedge firms and so on that make a financial killing while their activities are literally killing the planet itself. Others among us are calling for divesting from war. That movement building takes various forms. Code Pinks, for example, is working on a campaign for divesting from BlackRock, a major hedge fund. And here in New York, we have recently been building a movement calling for defunding a substantial portion of the Pentagon's mega budget, its giant annual mega budget, which is a killer budget. Currently, some $750 billion this year for military. That's 8.5 times. That's 8.5 times New York City budgets. You could fund every huge city in America, most big cities in America, and still have money left over to help fund the states with that kind of money. The Pentagon budget does damage not only to our communities by robbing resources, especially to under-resourced Black and brown communities, but it also outright destroys and damages the Black and brown communities in countries all around the world. Congress almost mindlessly votes each and every year for these gargantuan Pentagon budgets. Every year, the Pentagon gets better than half of the so-called discretionary budget, which is the budget that Congress crafts in negotiation with the president. For years now, for decades, that budget has been super high. It was extremely high under Reagan. He almost broke the bank with that, and it diminished somewhat under Clinton, and then it went right back up to very high levels, constantly in the $700 billion or more range, all of which is paying for wars and war making, the so-called forever wars or endless wars. But those phrases we have to think about. We should take them as a warning, and also as an advisement to all of us. We citizens of the USA have a special duty to change this destructive, planet-destroying narrative. We must end these so-called endless wars, or we will not survive. We will either fry in a nuclear holocaust or fry in an overheated, desperately polluted planet, or both. A planet overheated literally and figuratively at war and because of war. We have a profound choice to make, a deep, deep choice. Each of us has the ability to dig deeper, to commit ourselves to moving this military mountain. The mountain we must move is the mountain of polluting, life-destroying, climate catastrophe-inducing militarism that in this country is embodied in the Pentagon and a belligerent foreign policy establishment. Now, Tamara has already pointed out, the Pentagon is the single largest polluting institutional entity on the planet. No other institution in the world even comes close to creating so much destruction in terms of destroying civilian life, including damaging whole cultures, as happened in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and no other institution on the planet adds such vast quantities of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere as the Pentagon, otherwise known as the Department of Defense. Back in the days of World War II and before, it was more honestly called the War Department. The statistics are frightening and mind-boggling. If the Pentagon by itself were a nation, it would be ahead of Sweden and Finland in production of greenhouse gases. It would be in the top 60 countries, and it produces almost twice as much greenhouse gas pollution as does Denmark. And we know that corporate agriculture and the automobile industry and the fracking industry and the coal industry and the transportation industry are also gigantic producers of fossil fuel pollution. But if worldwide militarism were counted as an industry, which it basically is, the most destructive industry ever invented, then the numbers would be even more frightening, even if you look at it just through the lens of the looming climate catastrophe. The United States spends more in the military every year, according to the Swedish Institute that tracks these things, than the next 10 highest spending countries combined. And again, as Tamara already mentioned, jet fuel and also diesel fuel are the two fossil fuels that the Pentagon can't get enough of.
Yeah, yes, I gotta get money.
The metric tonnage of greenhouse gases measured in CO2 equivalents is so mind-boggling just from this source alone that it's difficult to wrap your mind around it. And I will underline the point she's already made. Go look at the cost of war project at Brown University. Just Google cost of war and Brown, and you'll get access to all of those charts and much more.
Gotta go someplace where they'll take $100 bill at some point.
The fact is that the United States and our allies, Britain,
Elise,
France,
can you do me a favor?
and
Tom, we have somebody who needs to mute themselves. I think they just did.
I just muted them. I just muted Frederica.
okay. So the US, Britain, France, and unfortunately, allies in the Middle East.
Oh, wait a second.
Tom, you're muted.
I am?
No, he's not.
You're back now.
Thank you. I just said that our allies that spend less than we do, nonetheless, are also burning up mind-boggling amounts of fossil fuels, emitting these greenhouse gases, basically so that the US and Europe can spew even more pollutants into the air and water and ground with our cars, trucks, commercial jets, agriculture, and industrial machinery. The reality is that the Pentagon pollution enables even vaster pollution. If we are ever to change this vicious cycle, we must get to the root of the problem. In essence, it comes down to recognizing that the US and its allies, to use Trump's words for handling protesters, want to dominate the world, and especially the oil and gas markets. That domination comes with a heavy military hand. Murder Incorporated has nothing on the Pentagon. Only this time, the Pentagon and its allies around the globe are murdering the whole planet year after year as the CO2 count in the air we all breathe climbs ever higher. So how can we possibly turn this nightmare scenario around? Margaret Mead said that never forget that a small group of people can basically change the world. And we've all heard and I hope internalized the idea of thinking globally and acting locally. And I'll even add the political insight of the former Massachusetts Senator Tip O'Neill, who said, all politics is local. We took those thoughts and put them together and borrowed from other movements and came up with Move the Money. We weren't the first to use that phrase, but here in New York City, communications capital of the country, we have set out to build the broadest possible community-based coalition that we can to challenge these policies and to call for substantially downsizing the Pentagon and moving those tax dollars into our communities for all sorts of human needs, building greater resiliency, improving schools, housing, healthcare, and transit, providing for our children and the elderly, creating and expanding good jobs in the public sector and private jobs that better the public good. Move the Money New York City recognizes that to move mountains like the Pentagon, we need to start at the grassroots and to spread the word. We are so happy to have Sierra Club New York City group as one of the endorsers of this campaign. But we have a lot of work to do, as I mentioned. New York City has a big bullhorn. We are the communications capital of the country, and what we do influences others. Here in New York, what we want are in-depth public hearings into what our communities really need and how much we're spending on the military. We want unions, local groups, issues groups, peace and justice groups, all to testify, and that of course includes environmental groups, to testify at these hearings, which will be televised. We want our city council to pass Resolution 747A, which calls on the federal government, that means Congress, to significantly reduce military spending. Already, the Poor People's Campaign, based heavily in faith communities, is calling for cutting $350 billion from the Pentagon. Now, that would be significant. Other groups like the unions and U.S. Labor Against the War and groups that are involved with Brooklyn for Peace and Peace Action all agree that our foreign policy is so dependent on war and militarism must be replaced by international cooperation, disarmament, and diplomacy, not aimed at domination and corporate empire building. We all live on one beautiful little planet. We all need to breathe freely, drink clean, clear water, grow healthy food to survive. We all want to thrive. That can only be accomplished in peace. Peace is not merely the absence of war. Unfortunately, we all know that conflict happens, but the scale of conflict and its intensity absolutely must be brought to heel. We've only recently left the 20th century, which brought the bloodiest conflicts in human history, using the most powerful weapons ever devised, including the doomsday weapon of nuclear arms. The paradigm of progress these weapons are meant to extend and protect is, of course, fundamentally flawed, in large part because it is so based on fossil fuel consumption. We need a new paradigm. We need a new industrial model, not the military industrial complex that directly accounts for a huge portion of production here in the USA. We need a model that is not based on the race to expand at the expense of 80% of the people on this little planet. The Green New Deal surely is a big part of the answer. It needs to be a just Green New Deal, and it must treat all with respect and equity. Coal miners, military shipbuilders, those who build the jets and the weapons and build the pipelines, all need good jobs. Jobs that can and should be in the rapidly growing renewables industry, jobs retrofitting buildings, jobs building efficient batteries and modes of transportation. And we will need good paying jobs, caring for our children, providing all the children with real opportunity, free of racism and militarism, and taking truly decent care of our elderly. If we move the money from war to our communities, we can begin to build that sustainable future. Here in New York City, already 1/3 of our city council members have co-sponsored Resolution 747A. We need more, and we need other cities and towns to take up that cry also. Moving the money from war to our communities is supremely intersectional. It embraces everyone. Many of us have been marching in the streets this past week or so. Militarized police, brutal and racist police, by the way, using funds that the Pentagon has given them to further militarize the police in the 1033 program. They are not the answer for our communities. That is not sustainable. Likewise, our military industrial juggernaut that feeds off of war and preparation for war, polluting massively even when not at war, is not sustainable either. We must build that new sustainable paradigm if we are to survive. Let's redouble our efforts and build the coalitions that can get us there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. That was absolutely wonderful. I think there's one question for you, and this is kind of debatable, and it would be a question that could take up a three-day conference. But the question is, how much of the defense budget should be cut, and what specific programs should be cut?
Well, I will go with the big picture proposal that has been pretty well researched with the help of the IPC in Washington, the Institute for Policy Studies, excuse me. The Poor People's Campaign worked with them, and they have produced in a report format, which I apologize, I'll have to dig the name of that report up. Came out about a year ago. They call for $350 billion downsizing of the Pentagon, and they spell out the specific programs. A lot of it is the over 800 military bases that girdle the planet. Those are tremendously wasteful. A lot of it is things like that, the F-15 program that Tamara already mentioned, the biggest boondoggle in military production history. But that's going a little above my pay grade when we get down to the specific programs. But there's at least been some very good thinking done about how we could possibly shrink the Pentagon by that kind of money, just for starters. And by the way, we'd still be outspending the rest of the world. So I view that, even that, as a giant first step.
Thank you, Tom. If I may, I have a little bit of a question. You mentioned AOC and the Green New Deal. And most of you probably know that nuclear power is dirty. It's not clean. It produces carbon-14, radiation. From the beginning of its life cycle to the end, it uses tremendous amounts of fossil fuels and mining uranium, turning it into yellow cake, transporting and so forth and so on. I won't go into all the 33 steps of producing spent fuel. But in a recent debate, AOC said that the Green New Deal is open to nuclear power. And what would you say to that?
Well, I don't believe that nuclear power, certainly fission-based nuclear power, is in any way green. And also the creation of using plutonium and whatnot, this is still useful to the military in the production of military weapons, everything from the atomic bombs, but also the awful, horrible depleted uranium weapons that we used in Iraq. We certainly can't rely on fission-based nuclear power. That's for darn sure. And I would disagree with her respectfully on that one.
Okay. And we have another question actually from Sally. For example, there was a big push this year to cut ICBMs in the NDAA. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Do it.
Okay, we'll have more Q&A at the end of our presentation, Tom. That was excellent. And I'm happy to hear so much work is going on with the veterans and with Move the Money.
Thank you.
Yes, and Sally is our next speaker. And many of you know Sally from her peace work. And she is a community activist who has been involved with Peace Action 2002, when she helped organize a chapter of Peace Action on Staten Island, where she lives, and to protest the impending war with Iraq. She is currently chair of the Peace Action Fund of New York State, where she's raising a lot of money to get these messages out to our youth on campuses all around New York State. And I can't tell you what a heartwarming thing it is to see all the work Sally is doing with our youth to help train our next generation of peace activists. And that's only one of many things that Sally does, as well as help with organizing that Women's March to Ban the Bomb. Sally?
Hi, everyone. I am just bringing up, I'm also going to do a presentation. Hopefully you can see this. Is everyone able to see?
Okay. Well, let's see, it was up there. Let's see where it goes. Yeah, okay. Okay.
We don't see it.
It was there
Okay.
for a second and then it disappeared.
Okay, my sharing went away. Okay,
There it is.
looks like it's there.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Catherine, and Tamara and Tom. You really set the stage for me. I think that we're in a very interesting moment, and I think you can understand that movements really don't happen spontaneously. It may seem like that, but it doesn't. It's the hard work of scholars and labor activists and the people who are on this phone who are laying the groundwork, and that's what we're doing here right now. So I'm going to segue to what's happening basically this year and what we're up against and what we can possibly do underneath the cry for money for healthcare, not warfare, and not for militarizing police. Okay, so the Congress right now is in the middle of starting to look at the Pentagon budget for fiscal year 2021, which is, starts October 1st. It looks like the number they're looking at is $740 billion, broken down. The Department of Defense, 671, and this overseas contingency operations for 69 billion. over the 3 years with Trump, the defense spending has increased $100 billion. And it is possible the military is asking for increases that could total up to $800 billion. And they're asking for this overseas contingency operations when our current war costs are $25 billion, not $69 billion. So the actual defense spending is actually a lot more than that. It's greater than $1 trillion a year if you add in the $100 billion for military pensions, the Treasury Department pays, and the $243 billion to take care of our veterans from the Veterans Affairs budget. We are starting to make noise, and people are starting to make noise at what is in the federal budget that is used to militarize our local police departments. We've seen a lot of equipment on the streets over the past couple of weeks. The Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Agriculture all give money to local police departments in one way, in grants and other means. And the one program that Tom talked about, the 1033 program, brings surplus military equipment such as what they call MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. I misspelled that, sorry, but we've seen them on the street in the pictures, bayonets, grenade launchers, plus more. Since 2003, when we were in the middle of invading Iraq, to now, the Pentagon spending has gone up. You know, you can see the line, it went down a little bit, but went up. The amount in 2003 was over 400 billion. Now it's over 700 billion. Meanwhile, supposedly we're out of Iraq and we're out of Afghanistan. So what's going on? Tom mentioned this, and tomorrow too, about this level of spending is just incredible when you compare it with all the other departments. This chart is from 2020, the fiscal year 2020, the proposed budget from Trump. 57% of our discretionary budget was proposed for defense. And you can't see it probably here because it's too small, but guess what we have for Health and Human Services? 7%. Guess what we have for the State Department and doing international work? 3%. And you know, on this chart, you don't really even see the Environmental Protection Agency. And then, you know, this just is, you can't say it enough. I guess it just gets, you have to look at these pictures. The big blue dot is the United States, and this is actually from 2018, but the relationships haven't changed that much, $643 billion. And then when you add up 13 or 14 other countries, and you stack them up, we are way up there, and the rest of the world, after you take the United States, the 15 other countries, and then compare it with the entire rest of the world, it's very dramatic. And Tamara showed us some slides which are really making the same point. And we've made these points, but just to reiterate, because you can't say them enough, we're at historic levels of Pentagon spending and on nuclear weapon spending. We are higher than the peaks of the Korean and the Vietnam Wars or the Reagan buildups. We're twice the Cold War average. Yet, right now, from what I can tell, the troops, US troops in Iraq and Afghanistan are less than 20,000 or less than 10,000. The Trump administration is actually not publishing troop levels in combat zones anymore. And as we know, spending does not mean more security. So why can't we rein in this spending? Many of you have heard Bill Hartong. He wrote an article, Why Can't We Rein in This Ridiculous Military Spending? And it basically came down we live and many people have accepted this doctrine of armed exceptionalism. And if you were here after 9/11, you know how that was amped up by fear. It wasn't that hard to get people on board for the invasion of Iraq. There's also the lobbying by the Pentagon, the arms lobby and its allies. And we have the case where military installations and weapons manufacturers are in every single congressional district of the United States. And people have done studies about that showing how that affects the military spending. Nobody wants to give up their jobs. Recently, 18 activists met via phone with Senator Schumer's military aide, Eric Altamora, earlier in May. And they were very passionate, but what the military aide basically said was, the Senate is constrained under this administration. And he listed a few things that Senator Schumer was working on or could do, and they were very lightweight. He tries to ensure there's parity between defense and non-defense spending. He says that this NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, will have language in it that will restrict the military from transferring money between accounts, like to build a wall. That's big on his list. He's also working on some environmental issues with the military, particularly in the Hudson Valley here in New York. I think that Tamara mentioned this, the contamination of drinking water by these chemicals that described with different acronyms, but PFOS is one of the chemicals that is in the water of communities in Hudson Valley due to military activity there. And he also says that he's working with the Department of Defense to mitigate the effects of climate change. Actually, we know that the Department of Defense is taking climate change very seriously. Michael Clare has written a book about that, When All Hell Breaks Loose. I probably have the title wrong, but it's like that. And he's really showed how the military is the one area in this administration that is paying attention to climate change. Of course, the senator wouldn't answer any questions about whether he would refuse campaign contributions from weapons manufacturers such as Lockheed Martin. So what has to change? We saw a big change over the last couple of weeks in terms of the movement for Black lives. We need a cultural shift, and maybe people's eyes will be opened. You never know how it will happen, but we need a clear-eyed assessment of what's really defense means and how do you provide it. And you can see that with how some of the proposals of the Black Lives movement for Black Lives is talking about. Their points that they're raising are about how policing is really not working, and you need to use different, breaking up the police department. Maybe we need to talk, about breaking up the Defense Department. And maybe apply some of what is going on domestically to what is going on in our military. So what do? We've got this $740 billion budget being right now in the Senate, being marked up. And we also are going to have later in June, the House looking at the markup. That's where they make amendments and then make adjustments to the military authorization. So there are 29 House representatives that wrote a letter saying they will not vote for the NDAA if it does not reduce Pentagon spending. They're putting their necks out there. And we often have some representatives that do that in the past, but we need to push more to make that statement. We have 29 now. Can we get it to more? So ask your representative to oppose the $740 billion budget, and support cuts, support eliminating this overseas contingency operations slush fund. And there is a progressive caucus in Congress that puts out a people's budget. You can ask them to support that too. And then when we talked about, we had a question about specifics, I wanted to say that the Center for International Policy has put out an interesting, I would say moderate, sustainable defense plan where they are talking about $1.2 trillion cut over 10 years. And it's very, very precise in what I can share that with you. I have a slide showing the specifics, but what it does is it scales back the nuclear modernization plans. It limits the OCO, this overseas budget, and it targets, because the budget is huge. I know you can't see this because it's too small, but I just want to point out some of the things that would add up to just $1.2 trillion over 10 years. That's just the beginning, I'm sure. And eliminate the new nuclear cruise missile, cancel the new ICBM, cancel the Space Force, cancel research and development on space-based weapons, cancel ground-based mid-course defense system, cancel new nuclear warheads, and roll back the modernization, and on and on. Close unnecessary military bases, replace some military personnel with civilians, end America's endless wars, etc. So they have put numbers against each one of these. I thought there was already too much on this, so I didn't include that, but it adds up to $1.251 trillion. So, as I mentioned, the NDAA is in the Senate Armed Services Committee right now. It's going to the House Armed Services Committee. That markup has been delayed, but we are in the middle of looking at this very important must-pass authorization, and it's an opportunity for us. So there's things we can do, and I want to suggest some things, and it's contact your senators and representatives, and we can, we're going to put up the switchboard number for you later. It's here, 202-224-3121. It's probably already on your speed dials, but also all kinds of other communication to get more representative to sign on to reducing Pentagon budget. And there are so many grassroots campaigns. What Tom is talking about, the Move the Money New York City campaign, is a wonderful opportunity to grow our allies on this Move the Money mission we're on. And Code Pink has a great campaign, Divest from the War Machine. The Poor People's Campaign, somebody put that in the chat on the moral budget. Don't bank on the bomb. And then every year there are the global days against military spending, usually around April and May, but you can do it anytime. Every day is a day against military spending. And then my last invitation is that next week, Peace Action is starting its virtual lobby days. And it's going to be different because we usually do it in DC. This time, all the lobby visits will be virtual and our trainings will be virtual. And I put down the actual times of when things are happening in the trainings and meetings. And if you probably may have trouble reading this, but they're going to have a segment on making your voice heard, ways to successfully advocate. Another section on how to lift sanctions in the COVID era. And then on Wednesday, So that was on Tuesday. The next day, Wednesday, they're going to have a segment on ending militarization at home, opposing police violence. Then moving the money, that's what we've been talking about. They're going to have a segment on that. The last day, it is going to be focusing on our going to Congress virtually. How do you make policy changes in Congress? How you perfect your ask to a particular representative or senator. And then the following days, starting Friday through Monday, June 29th, lobby visits are going to be set up. In the Peace Action New York State office, we are going to help set up visits and with the help of National. And you just need to send an email to me. I'll get it, so will our staff. info@panis.org, and we'll tell you how to register. They do ask for, when you get the email, you'll see there's a place where if you can donate, that's nice, but there's no requirement. So don't let money stop you from registering. Every single one person on this call could be an amazing voice, whether you're in New York or you're in New Jersey or wherever you are. I mean, we could have Tamara come on one of our lobby visits as an expert, I'm sure. But it's this is something I've been going to for years, and I feel like it empowers us as a group, as activists. We learn skills, we learn about these issues, and we take it to Congress. This is not the answer, I know. We are not going to get what we want in this NDAA. We're not. But we may, we need to kick up a storm. Even if the administration changes in January 2021, we're going to be in the same shape, because the Democrats and the Republicans have, if you looked back at Pentagon spending since 2003, we didn't make dramatic changes during the Democratic administration of Obama. It's a deep problem, and we have to make deep changes. And this is one way, and I invite you to join me on a virtual lobby day.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you. That was wonderful. A lot of important information. And you also had a question about people want your slides as well. So again, I will just say that we will have this up eventually on our website for Sierra Club. So you can just go to sierraclubnyc.org and you can find it there. And we have a few other questions. And again, if anyone else has a question, put it in the chat box. Type in your question and then just press enter. And Lucy Coteen, who is one of the members of Sierra Club New York City Group, and who was interested that we have some kind of event on the military, has a question for everybody. So maybe you want to take turns answering it. Why do you think environmental groups have not included the need to reduce military spending and pollution in their platforms? So that's for everybody. I don't know why, who would like to go first. Why do you think that more environmental groups have not included military pollution and emissions in their platforms? So it's like a hypothetical, but what do you think?
Well, I just want to say one thing. I think Tamara might have, and Tom might have other ideas. I think we have been operating in silos for too long. I think we're breaking them down. I think that's hopefully the old way of doing things, and we're going to connect.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to add something to that. That problem of environmental groups not speaking out on military pollution and military spending is a problem that I see in Canada as well. So the big environmental groups have avoided the topic because it's almost a taboo to speak out negatively against the military. So in US, in the United States, the polls show that there's great respect among the public for the military. And so so environmental groups don't want to come out to criticize the military. You know, they're also dependent on the public for financial support. So they don't want to get the public upset by criticizing the military. But we really need to turn that around. In Canada, I speak all over the place and directly about the problems of military contamination and spending, and saying to environmentalists that there is no way we are going to protect the climate, that we are going to save the environment if we don't deal with the problem of militarism and tackle it head on. So we have to have the courage to speak out about this. And we also have to have the courage to, like I said in my presentation, to say very clearly, we need to demilitarize. In Canada, we're starting to partner with environmental groups like Extinction Rebellion. And I know that there's a lot of partnerships between peace groups and environmental groups taking place in the United States. We need to speak to environmental groups, and especially young people, because they get it. They get it. They see that their future is on the line. They see that the military is a problem, and they're willing to stand up and to speak out. So we just need to keep making those connections.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you very much. Did you want to say something on that also, Tom?
Yes, I would. We're finding through Move the Money that if we can talk to rank and file trade unionists, that certainly in the service sector unions, like and the one that we've had the greatest success with so far is the Healthcare Workers Union 1199 here in New York. When we are able to go to delegate meetings and talk about what this is, yeah, people get it. They just need a little information. I would say that the vast number of people, they know military spending's big, but they really have no sense as to how it compares. Sally used that wonderful pie chart, and I enjoy going to meetings with workers anyway. And I always ask, who likes pizza? Everybody raises their hand. And I said, well, I got a different kind of pie for you. Take a look. And they look and they see that big blue military field, and they go, whoa, what's this about? And we start to have a conversation, and it's usually a very good conversation. And people haven't really swallowed the Kool-Aid whole that we need all this military spending for national security. Working people get, for them, security is a stable, affordable home, a school their kid can go to with the hope of moving along to a good career or college or whatever, healthcare, all those things. When we do our tabling in the streets at street fairs, Brooklyn for Peace has been a champion of this. If you get people's attention and show them what it is, boom, people are generally pretty quick to sign on. I'd say about 8 or 9 out of 10 people that we approach. So the crucial ingredient is to get as broad a coalition of groups actually doing some work on this with their own constituencies and talking about it. And we've got a postcard we use that has a quote from Martin Luther King about a country that spends most of its money on the military and not on social uplift, is approaching spiritual death. Big picture of Martin Luther King that catches people's attention. They look at the flip side. They see about the resolution. It's not rocket science, if you don't mind my using that expression. But it does take a lot of both a combination. I prefer doing it in real live person-to-person meetings. Now we have to do this, which has its advantages too, because people don't have to travel to get to the meeting. But the physical act of putting something in people's hands takes not social distancing. That's something we haven't solved.
Thank you, Tom, very much. Tamara, I'd like to go back to you for a second. And when you were talking about how different environmental groups, part of the problem may be that people in general and environmental groups may be hesitant to speak out against it. We were talking about a particular movement well, not a movement, but a very wonderful plan, the Drawdown book, which has done a lot of good in zeroing in on data in specific areas of our lives to decrease our carbon footprint. And you said something very interesting about the Drawdown book, and I wondered if you would like to share that, because it shows the hesitancy to include the military.
So Drawdown is an excellent initiative that was launched by Paul Hawken. Paul Hawken is a fantastic American environmentalist. He wrote the seminal book about 30 years ago or so called The Ecology of Commerce. And in this new initiative on Drawdown, he looked at different ways people could reduce, to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and to reduce carbon emissions. So if you look at the book, a lot of it is small scale projects largely in communities in developing countries. But one area that is a huge oversight is the fact that that Drawdown didn't pay attention to the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels on the planet, and that's the US military. And one of the things that he said when he was asked, why did Drawdown overlook the military, he said that there wasn't enough expertise and research on military fuel consumption and carbon emissions. Now that's true. I mean, one of the reasons why we don't have very much information is because the military is unwilling to disclose, fully and transparently their carbon emissions and their contamination. It requires a lot of digging and filing access to information. In Canada, I've had to file many access to information to try to find out information about the carbon emissions of the Canadian military. It's the same, in the US, there's just superficial information that's available, but we are just not going to be able to meet the Paris Agreement target by 2030. That is keeping global temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius if we don't demilitarize, if we don't stop wasting so much fuel from war games and from war fighting and from these gas guzzling war machines like the F-35s. So we are going to have to make the case out in the public. Drawdown isn't enough.
Thank you, Tamara. Yes, and I'm glad it is an excellent program and it does a lot, but we have to realize there's this huge gap that needs attending. I just wondered if any of you, in addition to everything that's been said in the legislation, all the work you three are doing within your organizations and contacts and spheres and so forth, if you had to select what is the one thing that we could do, and it may be just what's been coming out this last couple minutes in our discussion here, one thing that we could do to dissolve this problem. And I think Tom said it, you said it, and I think Sally touched upon it, and that perhaps is education. Letting people simply give them the information and the facts. And Sally, who was it, Ben of Ben and Jerry's talked about this at the talk couple, 2-3 years ago?
2017, yeah.
Yeah, at the, that awards dinner that you have. So yeah. What is the one thing, like each of us on this call, what's one thing that we could do today or tomorrow that would make the biggest difference, do you think, to bring this awareness to people, or start hammering away, or start dissolving the military budget? Of course, we could say voting and get these present people out, and I'm sure that would help. But do you have any ideas of what in addition might help? Any of you?
Any of the panelists? Or
Yes,
Rachel has her hand. Yeah, I saw Rachel has her hand up, so she may have an idea.
Okay, Rachel wants to talk. I'll put Rachel. Okay, so what like could people go home tomorrow, do tonight or go home tomorrow? Would you tell them to call their representative about this bill, Sally, you know, to try to get the cut in that amendment or that appropriations bill? What's
Well,
one thing?
Well, I think there's a movement happening right now in this country that's very connected to military spending, the militarization of our local police. I would like to have a conversation with organizers, hopefully at our peace action, meetings, how we make that connection and take this moment and push it forward, because what's happening here, on our streets is what's happening around the world. And, the pollution that's happening in the Hudson Valley and the water system as a result of military, the runoff from military exercises is going on all around the world. This is, I think you have to find the opening and push through. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Sally. Anybody else would like to give a suggestion of like maybe the most important or one of the most important? Because we need to do it all, obviously.
Rachel is still trying to say something.
Yeah, Rachel wants to say something.
Rachel, can we unmute you? Let me find you.
I think she is unmuted.
Oh, you're unmuted. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to spotlight on different area of the discussion. I think the most important thing is to stimulate local economy. I think it is very important to any small municipalities to be independent from military budget, because you see we have 50 states, and each state, and if you go to small towns, they do have either military assembly factories or high school graduate being recruited to the military right away, because there's no industry to go. Or if there's any industry, it's usually military assembly factories, okay? For example, in this country, we have so many small assembly factories all scattered in 50 states, right? And when it comes to weapons, 80 to 90% of parts come from Asia, including China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, you name it. They come from Asia. Okay, and importing parts, weapon parts, are tax-free, no tariff whatsoever. Importing weapon parts are easier than importing bananas. Okay, this is the reality. And when it comes to military budget reduction, when all local state representative raise their voices to reduce military budget, they usually, the weapon companies would say, okay, we're gonna close the factories in your state. And then they're gonna lose a huge amount of employees and relying on unemployment services, things like that. So I think it is very important to stigmatize local economy depending on military budget, okay? So we have to create more peaceful and sustainable economy, all different parts of the United States. And what we see here in the metropolitan New York area, yeah, we can see anything we want to, but if you go to countryside, it's for them holding military factories is the life or death issue. So for them, it is important to have something other industry to rely on, them to keep their local economy going, so that their sons and the daughters don't have to enlist military. So yes, I think it's important for us to discuss this, big scale issues. But if you go to countryside of this country, there's so many small community that they are heavily rely on military, and they do not want to lose their sons or daughters. They do not want them to go to war zones, but there's no other options. So this is the area we really have to change in this country. That's how I.
Thank you, Rachel. That's an important addition to this conversation. It's an idea that's been talked about before, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but having a Department of Peace.
Mm-hmm.
And to organize people, yes, to make peace, create peace, and to work with the renewable energy industries and all the other industries that do have peaceful jobs, peaceful products, peaceful industries. So that's something that has kind of risen and fallen at different points in our history. But that is something that might serve to coalesce and build coalition and allies amongst all people around the world who are working for peace rather than the military and war. So I think if a couple of us put our heads together and keep putting our heads together, maybe we could like push that or develop that or inspire to go a little more. I'll work on that with you, Rachel, and anybody else who wants to work on that.
Can I add?
And you have two
Oh,
people
sure,
who
go
have their
ahead.
hands up in the little
Yeah,
participant
okay.
thing.
Okay, Rachel, you wanted to add to that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, just for the last thing, I would like to add to that idea because I, up until last year, I've done consecutive 4 or 5 times speaking tour in Japan. I brought veterans of Vietnam Wars and post 9/11 veterans to share their war experiences with people of Japan, and it is not only to share their experience with local Japanese people, but for us to learn how the Japanese economy is heavily relying on US military budget. For example, if you go to a big town called Nagoya, that's the hometown of Mitsubishi Heavy Industry and Toyota automobile. So Mitsubishi Heavy Industry is family business of Prime Minister Abe, okay? And ever since Abe took the power, he increased to purchase F-35 more than 100 pieces, okay? So, and also their purchase price is 3 times more than the regular sticker price of this country. 3 times more, okay? Why? Because a lot of parts are made in Japan. So it is a good opportunity for them to spend their tax money to make those corporations make richer, so that they can donate lots of money to LDP. So believe me, majority of Japanese people don't want them to spend so much money on the weapons, but the government is just saying yes, 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 everything to whatever the United States says. And also, I wrote the question into this chat box about revolving door. In this country, those people who are big high ranking of the military forces will get a nice job in the weapon companies or NGOs, very righty NGOs, so-called think tanks, So this kind of a revolving door is making making matter even worse, as well as the financial sectors. The bankers, when they go to get some important financial position in the government, they get so much money from their banks, asking for, okay, you're gonna pass the good law for us to easily operate, and circling the money among this military-industrial complex. So I think we should somehow stop this vicious circle of money and people.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm a bit of a newbie on this, and I think all of you have been very, very helpful in helping me recognize. I think Pat has his hand up. Or her, Pat, somebody said Pat.
Pat Elder has his hand up, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
And thank you everybody for kind of jumping in on this process. So Pat, and then after Pat's question, I thought it might be interesting if the 3 of you wanted to ask a question of each other, or some of you might want to ask. I have one more question for Tamara, but I'll let you guys go first. Pat, did you want to ask your question? And then Sally, I think you had something you were starting to say.
No.
Okay. Okay, so Pat, and then if
Marcia Newfield has had her hand up too for quite a while.
Who?
Marcia.
Marcia Newfield.
Oh, okay. I've been going by the chat box,
Yeah,
not
no,
the
that
hands up, not the
not
hands.
everybody is doing it that way.
Yeah, okay. So Pat, thank you for
Okay.
that, Tom. Pat?
Thank you, Catherine. More of a comment, two comments real quickly. One responding to Rachel about the Japan. I have an article in the current edition of Global Geneva that addresses military contamination in Japan. And I think Abe is very vulnerable as far as that's concerned. But to a point about 15 minutes ago regarding environmental groups being reluctant to bash the military. I think it has everything to do with the Democratic Party. And so I posted a link to a story I wrote on PFAS Action Act in Congress that passed Congress. And the Democrats could only muster, to get behind legislation to regulate 2 of more than 6,000 varieties of PFAS. And Schumer, Hoyer, and Pelosi have been just reprehensible in their activities. And so as a result, the mainstream environmental groups like Sierra Club and everyone else, maybe except for Natural Resources Defense Fund, have just, been laudatory regarding the PFAS Action Act and have gone along with what the Democrats want. But if it affects the bottom line and it affects the monies they receive from the chemical industry, then they're not going to be proactive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Somebody else has their hand up? I don't see.
It was Marcia. Marcia, she's on the call. Let's see.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for my helpful neighbors here who are protecting me. But I had two points. One, I wanted to know when when this session will be up on your website.
We will get it up as soon as I can get the recording to our social media person, and our social media person, who is generally very prompt, will put it up on our website.
Okay, thank you.
And I can send that out. Whose email list are you on, or whose organization are you
Well,
in?
if you send it to Tom, I'm with U.S. Labor Against the War. And
Oh, so if I send it to
yes.
Tom, you'll get it.
Okay, and one more point I wanted to make. It's a very controversial point, but we've at our PSC Environmental Justice Working Group, we have
Marcia, not everybody knows what PSC is.
the Professional Staff Congress, the union for 33,000 faculty and staff at CUNY. And we have an environmental group, and one of the people is a physicist trained at MIT and recently retired, and his research has brought him to the point where he feels that the new generation of nuclear nuclear facilities.
Reactors?
Pardon me?
Reactors?
Yeah, can be very helpful to everybody in terms of energy. I'm just putting that out. I know it's controversial and there's people for it, against it, but it's out there.
Fusion would be completely different from fission.
Yeah. 2 things, if I can respond to that. I don't know if you've ever heard of Columbia University Earth Institute.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs, who runs that, is pro-nuclear, as are some other people. And it's quite unfortunate because, as I mentioned in the chat box, I don't know if any of you saw that, but Alfred Mayer, who's with Physicians for Social Responsibility, in our previous webinar that was dealing with nuclear weapons, said that public nuclear power plants are a cover for making nuclear weapons. And all of us are here saying, no more Hiroshimas, no more Nagasaki's, no more any of this. We have to stop the nuclear weapons. Well, one thing that can be done to stop them is to make sure we close all the nuclear power plants. Because as much as the military budget gets, still the manufacture and production of nuclear weapons would be prohibitive were it not for the nuclear power plants. And on these little ones, like GE is making like kind of a little reactor, and they also use them in submarines. So these small nuclear reactors, have been around for a while. But a lot of the technology that's supposed to come along with them has not lived up to its potential. And speaking of nuclear, if I can just ask Tamara a question, and then if you each want to ask one another. Tamara, in your bio, you mentioned something about working to let's see, global network against weapons and nuclear power in space. Could you talk a little bit about that movement or what you're doing with that?
So the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space started in Florida about 30 years ago. It's now based in Maine, and it's led by a fantastic American peace activist and veteran named Bruce Gagnon. And so it's an international network. There's people from around the world that are part of this network, and the focus is on preventing the increase an increase to the weaponization or the militarization of space, and to prevent the weaponization of space, to prevent the use of nuclear power in space. The global network is mobilizing to criticize and to stop the US Space Force, the new command that President Trump announced last year. And the global network was so instrumental to us in Canada. From 2002 to 2005, we were peace activists in the country were mobilizing to prevent Canada's participation in American ballistic missile defense, and the global network helped us. And we resisted intense pressure by President Bush to sign on to BMD, but the global network helped us stop it. So I encourage people to go to the Global Network website. It's www.spaceforpeace.org. Every quarter, the Global Network releases a space alert, a newsletter. It's really fantastic with stories about amazing activism and issues around the world. So have a look at the website, and you're welcome to participate.
Thank you very much, Tamara. So in addition to worrying about weapons here on Earth, we have to start thinking about them in space. And as I said, Jeffrey Sachs at the Earth Institute has done a lot of wonderful work. He's a tremendously charismatic person. I've heard him speak at the UN, but I believe he's on the wrong track on this one, as do all the people that I know working in the nuclear industry, and that's quite a few, or nuclear organizations like NEARS, Tim Judson with Nuclear Information Resource Service, and Kevin Camps and Beyond Nuclear. Okay, so I don't know how we want to do this, but Sally, since you and Tamara met each other here, and we have Tamara with us today, because of you, maybe you would like to ask each other a question about the work or anything that you're doing.
Well, I just want to thank Tamara really for her scholarly work, and I think I still have your sign that was in that first picture. I don't know, I want to ask you, is that the only copy of that sign?
It is the only copy of that sign, but I also have that sign printed on a t-shirt.
Okay.
Yeah, demilitarization for deep decarbonization, and I try to promote that everywhere I can.
Great. I want to show you my t-shirt that I'm wearing. Rachel has one too. And Rachel has the updated version. So it's the nuclear bomb in a wastebasket. And Rachel, are you still on? Rachel?
Yes,
Okay.
she is.
She's muted.
Okay. The updated version has a little dog doing you know what on the garbage can with the bomb in it.
There it is. She's showing it.
Oh, she's showing it? Let's see.
That's the newest version.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So we are actually doing the fundraising with this handkerchief. We have both design, this one and the old version, like your t-shirts. So you can put this on your chest, or you can make a mask. You can do a lot of things. You can make a little flag like this with a little stick on. So if you are interested in, please let me know. I have so many of this.
And you get in touch with Manhattan Project for a Nuclear Free World?
Yes.
Okay, that's the website. Manhattan Project for a Nuclear Free World. And I think each of those words is hyphenated, isn't it?
Yeah, I will put the web link right now. Hold on, please.
Okay.
In the chat box. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tom, did you want to ask anyone a question, either of our two speakers?
No, I just want to thank both Tamara and Sally and all the other participants for their participation, their leadership, and let's carry it on.
Yeah. And not only is it uplifting to hear everything you have to say, I particularly enjoyed having somebody with us from Canada, because we really have to work together. And maybe in the future somehow, in the not too distant future, we could combine our efforts. And I don't know if it will be on decreasing the military weapons or what it will be, but I feel that we've made that connection, and I appreciate that very much. Okay, so let me see if there are any more questions in the chat box. I think David is yet to speak. David, did you have a question? Because we were just going to do write-in, but I think we can do the hands up. David Jones, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
No. Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Okay. I was listening to Rachel, and I agree 100%. When you take something away, you put something back. So it's not as simple as when one says defund the police, for example, you're not exactly just snatching the money away from the police. You're redirecting the money in hopes of changing the police culture. When you redefine the police department, same way with the arms suppliers. We need to step away from arms. The whole idea, we're one of the largest arms merchants in the world. And many of the ex-presidents and dictators from other countries, what is the group I'm thinking of, the Carlyle group. Maybe a decade or so ago, I was pretty clear on what they're up to, but they were into having defense weaponry and stuff like that, buying into that and promoting that as a viable economic thing. And these little towns, if you get an industry that makes some kind of vital part for some popular weapon that the military uses, that means that their kids get a college education, or they maybe they go on vacation next year, they eat, their mortgage gets paid off or something like that. And that's one of the problems. When we take away from the military, we're restructuring the economy. And how do we do that, so that in some little place like Leftover Shoe, Alabama, they have a way of doing something when it's a one industry, one horse town. What do you do? I mean, it's like closing a base. Closing a base is a big deal, as they found out in the Philippines, and all over the world. All these bases provide money to the locals, and it's. I mean, we could start off right away by getting rid of the base in Cuba, handing it back to the people it belongs to. I know I'm starting to ramble here, but net is I believe that you cannot take away without putting something in its place, and hopefully the thing that we put in its place would be something that's more beneficial and more proactive, and something that will work for all of us in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that too, if it's all right. I mean, that's the whole concept of just transition, is that if you're going to take away a job from a particular worker who's been, let's say, working in the military production, there has to be a job available for them, or a way, at a bare minimum, if they're getting on in years, a way to keep them alive with a decent stipend if they're near retirement. But if they're not near retirement, they need something. And the average welder is not going to become a librarian. We've had people who are very peace-oriented, who work in the arms industry, tell us this at U.S. Labor Against the War. The global network, I've had contact with Bruce Gagnon, and they have done a good job of trying to project the idea that up at Bath Shipyard, at Bath Iron Works, excuse me, which is owned by General Dynamics in Bath, Maine, that they could be building other kinds of ships. They could be building completely different things, but they are shipbuilders. My position is, well, what about, we talk about just transition. It's not a overnight situation. Part of that transition could be, well, a way fewer military ships and way more advanced commercial ships, for example. They used to be a commercial shipbuilding yard before they went. It all started to go south in the sense of military. First in World War I, and then really on steroids in World War II, and it never stopped after World War II. Although, right up until I think the early 90s, they were doing a little bit of commercial shipbuilding. In 1994, President Clinton came along with a raft of politicians and said, "You are going to help you get back to commercial shipbuilding." Didn't happen. A different president came in. A different owner came in, which was General Dynamics. And their model, their business model is all military, all the time. Their biggest money maker is nuclear powered and nuclear armed submarines that they build in New London. They also build aircraft carriers out on the West Coast. So it is a big issue. We've had trouble getting the industrial unions on board with the idea of just transition. But I will say, in case you don't know about it, Catherine, I would highly recommend a follow-up session with people from the Labor Network for Sustainability. And John Braxton, who is on the board of U.S. Labor Against the War and teaches biology down at the Philadelphia Community Colleges, a former co-president of his local down there in Philly, is very active in both organizations. Here in New York, he's had contact, I know, with John Forster, who you know.
Yes.
Tom?
D37. Tamara?
Tom, can I just add that if you have a session on labor and the Greenpeace economy, I encourage you to also connect with activists in the UK, because there's a movement for a new Lucas plan. It's a fantastic initiative. I was on a webinar on it about a month ago, and it's a conversion plan from the defense industries to the green industries, and also someone from the Campaign Against the Arms Trade. They did that fantastic report in 2014 called Arms to Renewables. So there's been a lot of work being done in the UK on this. I also want to add to what Tom said in relation to the question that was asked, that a few years ago, Van Jones wrote a book called The Green Collar Economy, and he detailed how veterans, for instance, or people in the arms industries could be working on installing renewable energy, weatherizing homes and buildings, expanding public transportation, doing environmental education. We need a lot of people working on this great green transition to a low carbon economy and society. So there's going to be lots of work. And also when the United States gets Medicare for all, there's going to be a lot more people in the healthcare industry. We're going to need more doctors and nurses. So there's a lot of jobs, to care for the planet instead of killing the planet. And I just want to point you to the resource of Code Pink. They have a fantastic campaign that very much focuses on the local economy. It's called Divest from the War Machine. So check out codepink.org. And I also want to say that we need to do more than just speaking with people and educating people. I want us to be braver and to engage in more nonviolent direct action. We need to start shutting things down. We need to start occupying factories. We need to be doing sit-ins in our politicians' offices. We are running out of time. We've got 10 years. We really have to pick up our game, take more courage, and start doing more actions to be more visible.
Thank you, Tamara. Extinction Rebellion is very good at that. And I'd like to be in touch with you, Tamara, about the UK. So maybe we can email back and forth, because I would like to set something up about that transition. Two things very quickly about the shipbuilding. I suppose we're getting ready to install offshore wind. There was talk of making there was a shipyard in Brooklyn. What was it, Sunset Park? I'm not sure.
Right, the
But
Brooklyn Navy Yard.
well, they didn't go with the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I thought that would be a good, but I forget what the reason was. But anyway, we're going to need ships to service those wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, and there's plans for even more wind turbines. So I've been to 1 or 2 conferences where people who are the suppliers who have the goods and then people who are looking to hire them get together. And NYSERDA has been very effective in pushing the offshore wind and bringing all the groups together to make that happen. So I'm sure shipbuilders are definitely needed for, I know shipbuilders are needed for this. And in terms of the just transition, I did go up and wind turbines to Block Island. Fletcher Harper of Green Faith organized a trip up to see the 5 wind turbines at Block Island in up north. And the iron workers were the main ones that did a lot of that work. They had to drill down and, you know, attach them to the ocean floor. The first thing the iron workers have to do is they have to see how they deal with heights. And if they don't mind dealing with heights, which I guess a lot of the iron workers don't, like those Mohawk Indians, was it? Or some of the Indians who didn't mind. But yes, there's a lot of work to do in transition. And I think it's one of the nuclear power plants out in California, when it was time for them to decommission, they let half of the workers go, half of them were retrained, or a section of them, I don't know what the percentages were, but were retrained, and some of them were kept on board to do the decommissioning work because they knew where certain things were. So if there is political will, if there's community will, because in this Diablo Canyon, there's this power plant, all the segments, all the stakeholders in the community got together and said, we don't want any more nuclear power, we want renewable energy. And the utilities, the schools, the mayor, the citizens, the PTA members, everybody got together and worked it out. So I know it's possible. We all know it's possible.
Catherine?
We have the technology, we have the political will, and we have the community will, grassroots will. All we need is a political will.
Catherine?
Yeah?
Catherine, it's Joanne Robinson. And I may have missed this point. We're always going to educate our federal representatives, but do we educate our local people as well? Because on their platforms, when they're running for office at city or local legislators or county legislators or what have you, do we educate them about this issue and make sure that this is something they can have on their platform, because it does affect their constituents, because their constituents need jobs and their constituents need to be involved. So I don't know, maybe I missed that point. I didn't hear it, but do we do that?
That's precisely what we're trying to do with Move the Money. We're focusing on our local representatives, because you're absolutely right. They number one, they do legislation locally, but they will also graduate into the higher ranks, some of them, and we want to get them when they're still fresh.
I know we talk about Move the Money, but to push them, that when they work on local platforms in these cities, that they actually come out and they speak about these things. I understand them, but really push them to do it. We push the federal people, but we don't push the local as much.
Cousins who came up in Yonkers, who is now in Albany, she's very good about these things, and she's one who listens. So I think we really have to have, as we all know, legislators who listen, legislators who care. And then there are, I think, plenty of people who can go and educate them. But we have to make sure we're getting the right people in there. Okay, it's just about 9, and I would like to close with each one of you making a closing statement of encouragement or suggestion of what people can do. So either a word of encouragement or kind of a wrap-up statement of what encouragement about where we are in this problem. So why don't you go first, Sally, since you went last in the presentations.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
I would just like to repeat that movements don't start spontaneously. You know, they start because of all the hard work that is done over every day in and day out, like Catherine and Tamara and Tom and all the people on this call are doing.
Rachel and Joanne and everybody.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing. We're not. So and the spark may be lit, at some point, and we need to be there.
Okay. So you're saying just keep at it, keep working,
Keep at it.
find your place.
And there will be people who will do things differently than we are. You know, that's good. You know, all of the different methods, that we have, just use them all. What your skill base is, what you're able physically to do that.
Excellent. Good advice. Tom, you're in the middle, so both ways.
Well, first I'm going to give a little pitch to reach Move the Money New York City. Simply email movethemoney.nyc@gmail.com. And we'll tell you how to connect up with the documents. There's a link that connects you to the different documents. I would ask each and every New York City resident on this call to work with us a little bit. We need to reach every single council member in all 51 districts here in New York. There are 17 who've signed on so far in support of Resolution 747A. We would need 9 more to get to a simple majority. And the list is available on that link that I told you. But again, to reach us, movethemoney.nyc@gmail.com. And we let's blend our movements together around this sectional activity. Move the money from war to our communities.
That's great, Tom. Offhand, can you think of 1 or 2 districts that haven't signed on yet? Council members?
Well, yeah, Mark Levine uptown on the Upper West Side. Sylvia Rodriguez has already volunteered to help out and leading a delegation there. And Carnegie in Brooklyn is another. Mark Traeger out in Brooklyn is another. Richie Torres in the Bronx is another. It's good to look at the list. Also, the list shows you, if you don't know who your city council member is, we have a link that shows you how you can find who your council member is, because a lot of people don't even know.
Okay. Thank you. Mine's Margaret Chin, District 1.
And she is one of the co-sponsors. And I should have said, if you find that your council member is a supporter, please send them a message thanking them and telling them why
And asking
and who
them,
you are.
and asking them to get their colleagues who haven't signed to sign.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Tamara, our Canadian guest this evening, our Northern Hemisphere, we make a group here that we haven't had before.
Let me just say in closing that it's so nice to connect with all of you. I'm in awe of how hard you're working to take on US militarism. We are trying really hard to deal with our problem of Canadian militarism. I believe that we are going to succeed if we cooperate and if we move in a spirit of solidarity. I was just thinking how while you are having those huge marches in your cities, defund the police, stop police brutality. We had huge marches in Canada. Thousands and thousands of people were on the streets in my city. So solidarity is the answer. And let's take a little bit more courage for climate justice and for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara.
Hip, hip, hooray.
Thank you, everyone. You were all wonderful. And bless you in your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you very much, Catherine.
Bye, Tamara.
Bye. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you,
Thank
Sally.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Rachel. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.